It's draft season, coming at you with a ClipperBlog Live NBA Draft Special. Fred Katz here with quite the crew of guests for today. We got no actual ClipperBlog people because, well, ClipperBlog people aren't the best college basketball people, and they're going to get mad at me for saying that, but I don't care. From Basketball Insiders, regular on the show, Nate Duncan. What's up, Nate?
Hey, how you doing?
Making his first ever ClipperBlog Live appearance, we got Jonathan Sharks from I guess from all over, but Real GM.
Hey, folks.
And another regular, Jack Winter from Hardware Paroxysm. What's up, Jack?
Hi, guys. Like 76 hours or something from the draft on Thursday. Can't get here soon enough.
But who's counting down, right?
Exactly. So it just came to me in like 10 seconds. Very impressive.
Exactly. Some quick background info before we go. The draft's Thursday night, as Jack said. That's June 26th, 7:30 start time on ESPN, and we'll be getting to Clipper talk a little bit later in the show. For now, we're going to start off with some more general draft talk, top 10 picks, all of that. So Jonathan, I'm just going to come at you with the first question right now. Who do you think is the most underrated prospect that we're looking at in this draft? Who's the guy who hasn't really been talked about, maybe going high enough, maybe he's not getting enough press, who maybe deserves a little bit more attention than we've seen?
To me, it's Kyle Anderson at UCLA, or him or Zach LaVine. I like both those guys a lot. I think Anderson, to me, is a young Boris Diaw. He's big, he can dribble, he can shoot, he can pass. He's a pretty good all-around player.
Well, for me, I think Vasilije Micic out of Serbia. I think he's going to end up either as the third or fourth point guard, best point guard in the draft. He is, depending on what you think of Elfrid Payton, he's probably the best passer in the draft. He's 6'5", great handle, one of the best handles of any guy I've ever seen out of Europe, and also has a pretty good shot and decent quickness as well. So he's a guy that I really like a lot as a sleeper in this draft.
I wish I knew as much as Nate did about the European guys, but I don't. So I picked Nick Stauskas here. I realize he's getting looks as high as 8, but just in terms of a guy that can really do it all offensively, he's underrated off the dribble. He's great in the pick and roll. Something that's not talked about with him is that he gets to the line really, I mean, not at will, but he gets to the line really well for an elite shooter, and he tested really well athletically as well. His lane agility was, I think 10th overall in this class. So I'm a big Stauskas fan, and whether or not he's properly valued at 8, I don't think he is. I think he should be considered right below those top 3 guys top 4 guys with Randall and Vonleh and the like.
The question for him is going to be defense mainly. A lot of these guys, who can they defend? And whether he'll be good enough. I think he's a better offensive player than Gary Harris and Rodney Hood, but it is two-way potential. I'm not really sure about Stauskas.
No, I think he's completely undraftable because he has 12% body fat based on the test that has a 5% margin of error. So, we can't draft him.
I like what Jonathan said, though. The defensive questions with him are valid. I mean, there were many times where he was just completely beaten off the dribble or just really kind of indifferent in Michigan on the defensive end. Just watching it was obvious. So that's obviously something he needs to clean up. But offensively, he's arguably the most complete player in this draft. Yeah,
he's a really well-rounded player. That's a question a lot of these guys is their offense good enough to hide their defense? That's what you're going to ask for a lot of these players at that stage of the draft anyways.
And I think that's an issue with something. I mean, Nate. I love how Nate brings up the European guy. I knew he was going to bring up Micic. Like we've had discussions about Micic on G-Chat because I love him too. He's such a good passer. Like he is really such a good passer, and he's so good at creating for others off the dribble. But he's another guy who he's probably fallen partly because he's a European guy and he's kind of an unknown. Also partly because he's not really a defender either, and he kind of got torn up defensively when he went against the USA Select team. So I think a lot of these guys, kind of the issue this year is there aren't that many great defenders. That's kind of why my guy who I think is undervalued is Adrian Payne, because Adrian Payne really understands how to defend in the pick and roll. He's more of a finished product. His range extends out to three-point range. He's got legitimate power forward size. He knows how to set screens. He intuitively understands where to pop and find space after he sets those picks. He's just a guy who, if he were 19 years old, then Adrian Payne would be a top 10 pick. I think there's no doubt if he could play like this at 19. It's just that people think his ceiling is lower because he's 23, and that's probably right. But but I don't necessarily agree with him going, draft express going 21 to the Thunder. If OKC gets him, if a really good contender gets him, I think that's going to be a really good third big man who can help them defensively. He's not a great rebounder, but he's a good big man who can help the team defensively, who can space the floor like crazy, be a legitimate stretch four. I really think he should be going way higher than the 20s.
I mean, Fred, we've been talking about Payne for what seems like 3 months, you and I on GChat. Everyone loves Tom Izzo guys. Payne's obviously one of the smartest players in the draft, knows where to be defensively, so versatile offensively, and while he didn't dominate the way that his kind of natural talent and the fact that he was a senior suggests that he should, when you're projecting, I think there's still improvement there with Payne, and he's obviously not going to be, a top 2 or 3 option on the team. He'll be more of an ancillary piece, and I think he's really well suited to that role. And just in terms of versatility on both ends of the floor, I'm not sure what much more you can ask than Adrian Payne gives you. So I agree. I'm a big fan of his.
I would say another guy who's underrated, not really a sleeper, but when you're talking about the lofty strata of the top 5 picks, Dante Exum is someone who's being talked about as 3 or 4. I think he should be very firmly in the conversation for the number 1 pick after Embiid's injury. Although I think ultimately I would choose Jabari there. I think that he's much better prospect than Andrew Wiggins and is a pretty firm number 2 on my board.
I agree with Nate with Exum. Like, to me, it's all about two-way potential, and he's got as high as anyone in this draft. I think he's just as good as the top 4 or 5 players in anyone's board, Exum.
Exum has a long way to go, though, right? Can we all agree that Exum has a long way to go on both sides of the floor? I like Exum. I think he could end up being a really good player, but I think he's more of a team that's willing to take a risk or a pick that team would take. Maybe a team that's really confident in its player development and its way they're developing players. Teams that don't have a great history of developing players may want to go with more of a Wiggins or a Parker. I think is closer to a finished product. Do we agree on that, or is someone going to challenge me on that point?
I would say no. I think Exum is far along than Wiggins, to be honest, on the offensive end. Like, Wiggins is a great athlete, but I'm not sure really. Like, if you watched the Hoop Summit 2 years ago, Exum was ahead of him then in terms of his ability to feel the game, dribble, and pass the ball.
But I don't see Exum play any defense. Nate, I know you watched a lot of Exum film. You want to talk about Exum's defense a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I will say this. I think his defensive potential is high. I agree with Jonathan on that point. However, that's based on the 4 times that he got in a stance and actually guarded someone in the course of maybe like 5 or 6 games that I've watched him. Now, he can move his feet like crazy, and the lateral testing at the Combine bears that out. I'm also in agreement that his offensive game is a little further along than some may think. I think his shot is pretty darn good. He has the ability to rise on balance. He's been shooting FIBA threes at not an amazing percentage, but good enough that you can't just lay off him. And his off-the-dribble game is excellent. He certainly needs to get stronger. But, yeah, I mean, I think offensively he's someone who at least is going to be able to get in the paint right away. It'll be an adjustment for him. I think that's certainly a big part of it. But as far as the actual skills that he has, I think he could be able to contribute right away, at least offensively. But defensively, it's going to be a nightmare.
Well, I think to me that's pretty much a given for a young player. Like, I look at defense pretty much on physical ability and tools, because I think the first 2 or 3 years in the league, they're not going to play much defense. That's pretty much set in stone, almost regardless of who the player is. So it's all about long-term potential. That's how I ball.
I think a nice transition would be just to say that, we talk about how a lot of these guys don't play defense. I mentioned that before, and you're right. I mean, I agree with you. Defense is one of the last things that tends to come because that comes with an experience, with more of learning the game, more of a defensive IQ type of deal. Isn't that what makes Aaron Gordon maybe under-talked about? Because Aaron Gordon really understands how to play defense right now, and he's also got the upside because he's got the athleticism, and he's just a freshman. I think he's only 19 still. Jack, does that say something for Aaron Gordon? Who comes out of Sean Miller is so good at teaching team defense. You look at guys on that Arizona team, and Brandon Ashley understands how to rotate, and even guys like Nick Johnson, like they understand how to move defensively. And Gordon is 100% one of those guys. So does that give him some sort of advantage over these other guys defensively when he comes into the league already probably having a greater understanding of defense than those other 19, 20-year-olds who are coming in with him?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, I think Arizona and Sean Miller is a good example. I think Tom Izzo and Michigan State's a good example. Bill Self in Kansas, these coaches, college coaches who really put an emphasis on the defensive side of the ball, their prospects going into the next level have that added advantage. The question for Gordon is, he had a really, really low rates of both steals and blocks this year, which for an incredible athlete, with length and a guy who moves his feet like a guard and jumps out of the gym, and like you said, really knows where to be, that's pretty damning. I think the comparison I keep coming back to for him is an in-prime Andre Kirilenko. But just based on the fact that he really didn't steal the ball or block as many shots as you'd have liked this season, that may be optimistic. Kirilenko was a guy who would get 5x5s routinely, not routinely, every now and then. And Gordon didn't show that type of flashy defensive potential at Arizona.
Yeah, to me, Kirilenko is a pretty good comparison for Gordon. I'm a big fan because I think Kirilenko is always an underrated player. He's been able to defend multiple positions and moving the ball on offense. I think Gordon's not gotten a lot. That's another guy I think could be higher rated in terms of most of these mock drafts.
Oh, Kirilenko, when he was with Utah, I think people forget how good he really was. I think people think of him as the role player that he's been the last 6 years or so. But when he was in his prime with Utah, he was a first-team all-defense guy that 1 year. He was amazing. He averaged over 3 blocks a game a few years while playing just amazing and versatile defense. Let's move on. We talked about the guys who are maybe a little bit undervalued. How about some of the guys who are overvalued in this draft? Jack, let's start with you and just move down the line. Who do you think is someone who's really been overvalued? Whose stock might be too high right now?
I hate to say it because I love hyper long athletes that get to the line at will. But for me, it's Elfrid Payton. I know he's a good passer. I know he got to the line. I know he's really, really good in college, but just the fact that he shot 59% from the line and 18% on spot-up jumpers this year, in today's NBA, that's just so damning. Whether or not you're a point guard or whether or not you're a 4, shooting is at an all-time premium, and he doesn't have it. And also, I'm wary of any guy that rises, 8 to 12 spots in the draft process, and that's what he's done.
Yeah, I agree with Jack on Payton. Just because if you're a point guard who doesn't shoot the ball's in your hands all the time. You have to be like Rondo as a passer, basically, at that point, to make up for your lack of shooting ability. For me, the guy is McDermott. I love the way he plays, but he's a scorer, and I don't see him playing much defense. If he's going to be your third or fourth option on offense, what else does he do with it? He just scores well. He doesn't pass very well. He's not a great rebounder. And I'm not sure what position he defends at the NBA level.
Andrew Wiggins, I think, is a little overrated. I think he doesn't have the offensive ceiling that I would like to see. I don't think he's a natural scorer, both in terms of his ability to get by guys off the dribble, and even more importantly, perhaps, as far as finishing at the rim. Despite all of his tools with the 7'0 wingspan, 6'8 height, and reported 44-inch vertical, he really doesn't dunk on guys that much, especially when it's he's the one who's creating it, especially when he's in the half court. And then when he's not dunking, he misses a ton of layups. And while it's certainly very possible that he could get that and make me look bad because of the physical tools that he has, it's worth acknowledging that that is not a strength of his right now. And there are a lot of guys who have never really developed that feel for finishing at the basket. Thomas Robinson being the most apt example for me as someone whose career has really been scuttled in some respects by his inability to finish the looks that he gets at the rim. That's what makes me a little bit worried about Andrew Wiggins. I mean, and his shot, looks okay. He shot 35%. He's young, but there's no. And if he becomes a 40% three-point shooter, then maybe things change a little bit. But I think most people would acknowledge that his offensive ceiling is about Paul George level. And if that's your ceiling, and then when we say ceiling, that acknowledges that the likely outcome is a little bit below that, maybe he's not worth the top 2 pick. Maybe he's more, 4, 5, 6 range, to me at least.
I'm going to take the other side of the coin. I'm going to say the overvalued guy is Jabari Parker. Um, he's refined offensively. Yeah, I mean everyone talks about he's refined offensively, but yeah, he's refined offensively. But he is. People didn't really want to talk about it all year, and then they kind of talked about it when Duke dropped in the NCAA tournament. But he wasn't even a bad defender this year. He was a really horrible and unwilling defender. He doesn't really understand where to move when defending against the pick and roll. He has these moments where he randomly doubles in the post when he's not supposed to, and then he kind of sags off and never actually recovers to anybody, and so just kind of ends up standing there in the middle of the lane and leaves the Duke defense completely open to guys who are just cutting. And they give up a lot of points like that this year, where he'd just come over, try to double a guy for like a very soft double for a split second, then sag off, get in the lane, and then this guy would just cut in and score right off of that. Those are really pressing issues, and I think the fact that he's not particularly quick. We know there are the issues with him not being in the best shape he could possibly be in, which is something that's very fixable. We heard Andre Drummond's not in great shape, and then look at what he's turned into. That's something that can be fixed with maturity and your body getting better and aging and all of those sorts of getting paid, all of those sorts of things. But it's not that I think Parker's going to be bad. I don't know why you would take somebody like him who you have not seen play a lick of defense, who doesn't seem like he's going to be able to outquick anybody at the next level, over a Wiggins or maybe even over an Exum, or even maybe over a Noah Vonleh, who's just got this unbelievable length and great athleticism and already has some skill around the basket. Maybe you can get a scorer, but like people talk about, like, he really reminds me of Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay is the guy who we all talked about is an overratedly offensive player because he's not particularly efficient the last 2.5 years. I don't know if that's necessarily a guy that you want to take first overall when you have these other options out there.
I'm glad you brought up the defensive problems for Parker, and we obviously all know about those. Whenever anyone talks Jabari, people talk about how great he is on offense, but then on the other side of the coin, just how poorly he is on defense. The problem I have with Jabari, aside from the defensive issues, which, like I said, we all know about, he's not the incredible offensive talent that everyone thinks he is. It's as if people stopped watching college basketball after the first 6 weeks of the season and just decided that he was a 48% three-point shooter and was great from the pinch post and all that. When in reality, Jabari Parker shot 30% from the three-point line in conference play this year for Duke. He shot 45% from the field in conference play for Duke. I don't see that transcendent or close to transcendent offensive talent that people think Jabari has. And if he doesn't have that, his defensive issues are such that I'm not sure he's worth a top 3 pick in this draft when your other guys are Wiggins, Embiid, and Exum. And then Nate, just real quick, you mentioned the Paul George comparison for Andrew Wiggins. And I think that's a good one, but a key difference that people seem to be forgetting there is that Wiggins got to the line almost at will this season at Kansas, and that's while being really, really raw as a ball handler. Paul George obviously is just kind of coming along and really attacking the rim and getting the free throw line, but he certainly didn't have that at Fresno State, and that's something Wiggins had just in his freshman year at KU. So that's something to consider when comparing Wiggins to George.
So you think he has a higher offensive ceiling than George then, Jack?
I do, yeah.
I got to disagree with you guys a little bit on Jabari, especially Fred saying that he's not that quick. He is that quick. Despite the fact that he's a little bit doughy, I think he is. He's got a great jab step. He's got the ability to go by guys. His step back is really fast. His release on his shot is real fast, and it's high. I think also that he's someone whose off the dribble game is underrated. He's got a lot of moves. He has more moves than anyone has in this draft, and that's something that, although you can learn moves, a lot of that is the ability to actually use them is a skill that doesn't necessarily always teach that well. And finally, I think this is something that he didn't really do at all at Duke. I think he's going to have the ability to run pick and roll and be a pretty decent passer. I saw some very small flashes of that in the film that I watched, and with him playing the 4 and being the ball handler in a pick and roll, that causes all sorts of matchup problems.
I like it. We've got some actual debate here. This is our first debate point, guys. This is a good thing. Nate, we can. I don't know. I'm not the hugest Parker guy. It's not that I don't think he's. I agree with you on the pick and roll point, Nate. I think he's got really good ball handling skills, and if he's going to be a 4, which I think he probably will be with the current NBA landscape, and the fact that as Kevin Arnovitz likes to say, if you have to ask if someone's a 3 or a 4, it probably means that he's a 4. I think he'll probably be a 4, and I agree with you. He's going to be a great ball handling 4, and I think he will be able to create offensively, but I don't know if the defense makes it really all that worth it when you have options like Wiggins, who could blossom into a 2-way player, Exum, who could blossom into a 2-way player. I don't know if I'm taking a guy who I think is probably going to be a decidedly 1-way player for the first game.
I like that point, Fred, and it's one I always come back to and have been coming back to when discussing this draft for a few months. I think there are 2, maybe 3. To be honest, I don't know enough about Exum as I'd like. 2, maybe 3 guys in this draft who could be a good team's best player on both ends, and it's Wiggins, it's Embiid, and it's Exum. Parker could obviously be a good team's best offensive player, but defensively he'll always be a liability. So that's really something that these teams drafting in the top 2 or 3 need to consider.
Well, let's
yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
What about the fact that all the analytics models really don't like Wiggins at all? What do you guys make of that? I've looked at 4 or 5. I haven't seen one that's had him higher than about 10th, and that's something that it worries me, to be honest, that I deviate on him so much from the conventional wisdom just by watching him. But then the fact that the analytics also, I think, are kind of in my corner emboldens me somewhat in that stance.
No, I'm with Nate on the Wiggins talk in a lot of ways. I'm just not sure how great he is on offense. For me, the big thing is his assist-to-turnover ratio. Wiggins has no idea how to see the floor and get other guys the ball. And for a perimeter player who just looks for his own shot, is only so valuable. And on top of that, he's not a great ball handler. To me, I'm with him in terms of his whole offensive ability. I think Wiggins is more of a number 2 or 3 option on offense, in all likelihood.
Well, Wiggins is just so raw. And when you look at his numbers this year, I don't have them in front of me. I think 17 points a game, 45 from the field and 35 from 3. Considering how raw he is, I think that's encouraging. I think he has room to get better. The guys at P3 where he's working out are supposedly really working on him staying low with his dribble and really once he gets past his first defender reading defenses, because that's really what I saw at KU this season where he had problems. No problems at all beating his man with an incredibly quick first step. It's that once he gets to that second line of defense, he doesn't know what to do. Whether or not it's pass the ball, whether or not it's explode off 1 or 2 feet to finish at the rim. Go ahead.
That's actually really hard to develop, though. If you look at Ben McLemore's numbers at Kansas last year, they're pretty close to Wiggins in terms of what he could do and not do on the game.
Which reminds me, that's the point I wanted to make. I went to KU. I've been a KU fan my entire life, which I'm hoping doesn't lead me to bias to this Wiggins discussion. But yeah, you know that, Nate. But Bill Self's offense. Bill Self's a phenomenal coach. Bill Self's offense doesn't lend itself to individual players, especially wing players. He didn't put Wiggins in many spots that Jabari Parker was put in at Duke this year, or that John Calipari would have put Wiggins in this season. So that's certainly something to consider when you're looking at his numbers, and then when you're looking at the film as well. If you want an idea of the type of player I think Andrew Wiggins can be, just go back and watch the West Virginia game. I think it was something like 41 points, 9 rebounds, 5 steals, and 4 blocks. It was one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen, and obviously that's a ceiling, and guys don't reach their ceiling all the time. But the fact that it's there, and he'll certainly be an impactful defender from day one. I think it makes him a worthy number 1 pick.
That was an amazing performance what he had against West Virginia. That was a really great game. Let's move on to one guy we haven't spoken about who's supposed to be a top 10 pick, which is Julius Randle. I love the Julius Randle discussion. I think I've had it with a couple of guys on the show right now already. Randle is a really, really skilled offensive product from Kentucky who produces NBA players like, Pringles produces potato chips. But he's really strangely sized, I think is the best way to say it. 8'9" standing, 8'9" standing reach, and you kind of want your bigs to probably be around 9 feet or higher than that. If you want to turn him into some sort of a rim protector, he's not. People compare him to Zebo, and I don't think he's Zebo in terms of athleticism, but he's not. He's definitely not the most athletic player in this draft. And his block numbers were not fantastic at Kentucky at all, averaging I think less than 1 per 40 minutes, which is not really what you want to see. I don't know if Randall's ever going to become a rim protector. So with that, and as the league continues to go forward, as this, we start to realize that you really need 2 defensive bigs, or at least 1 great defensive big to protect from the mistakes of the other not great defensive big in order to be a championship caliber defense. Sorry, that's my notifications going off. Then, Nate, is Randall someone that you would want to take top 5 or 6, or do you think you have to move him down just because even if he's able to put up tremendous offensive numbers and good rebounding numbers, then unless you have that great defensive complement right next to him, your team ceiling might be capped at something below.
So a couple of points here. I mean, I think let's start talking about how good his offense can be. I think that he, after Jabari, he to me has the second greatest chance of averaging 20 points a game. Assuming all of this assumes that he's healthy and this foot thing is not an issue. I think we'll just all make that assumption. I hope for this discussion, but assuming that works out, and he's an excellent rebounder as well. He's someone who's going to proved to be a much better shooter than he showed at Kentucky. The few times when he actually got catch and shoots, he was pretty effective. He looked smooth with it. He's got a great knack for finishing around the rim. He's real good at facing up and attacking out of the mid post. He's like Blake Griffin in that way, that he's more effective facing up than he is trying to really back down and bludgeon his opponent. In fact, he has very similar measurements to Blake Griffin, although he's not the athlete quite that Blake is. But about the defense, I agree with you. He's going to be able to move his feet okay. They switched him on to guys in pick and rolls towards the end of the year, and he was relatively effective in that role. But aside from his mobility, he's not going to block any shots. Defensive rebounding will be fine. But yeah, he doesn't provide much rim protection. But there are 2 things I would say to that. Number 1 is, if you really go through the list, there are not that many great rim protecting 4s really in the league. I mean, you talk about someone like Taj Gibson or something, there's not that many of those guys around and that's part of it why not having a rim protecting center is so bad, because you're going to struggle to find that at the 4. I mean, I've thought many times, how are the Kings going to find someone who can some shots to put next to DeMarcus Cousins, and there really aren't that many of those guys out there. So I think it is really helpful to have rim protection at the 4, but a lot of teams don't really have it, and that's just kind of how it is. Secondly, if you have a guy who's going to average 20 a game, if we're talking about the 5th pick, the 6th pick, draft him, because we always overvalue what the actual outcome of these picks is going to be. And if the 5th pick, the 6th pick, someone who has a very high chance of being a 20-point scorer, good rebounder, all right, fine. He has some defensive deficiencies. That's still a great pick at 5 or 6.
I like Randall. Always have. Like you said, I think he's a better shooter than he showed at Kentucky, and I think the extra space of the NBA game will really help him when he's working from the post. He'll face up and be able to beat people off the dribble and use his broad shoulders and his strength to kind of finish that way better than he did maybe better than he did in college. But the defensive question, which is what you asked Fred, I think all you have to do is look at the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA Finals. They didn't play Tiago and Timmy, very often at all against the Heat, and they got by because they always had one of them on the floor. They're both very good rim protectors, but then they just run an excellent scheme, and they have Kawhi Leonard's a fantastic defender, and if you have a system that you can rely on, your guys are committed, and you have 2 or 3 upper echelon defenders on your team, you can hide guys. And I don't think Randall's necessarily a guy that's going to need to be hidden, but like Nate said, there aren't many 4s in the league that can block shots at an elite level. He mentioned Taj, Serge Ibaka is the other one that immediately comes to mind. You don't necessarily need that if you have the proper personnel around a guy like Julius Randle. So offensively, I think he's going to be very good, and defensively, I think he'll be average at the very least.
Kind of piggybacking on what Nate was saying about DeMarcus Cousins, I got to consider Julius Randle as finding the guy to put next to him. He's a guy who needs to score on the basket on offense, and needs someone to get his back on defense. There's very few guys who can do both those two things, who can stretch the floor for Julius and attack the rim, and also block shots behind him. So it's just hard to build a good team around Julius Randle. I think that's the main concern with him, is the guys around him in terms of building a roster to fit his strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think Randall is going to be the ultimate. It depends on where he goes, guy in this draft. I'm actually a fan of his. I really like him. I think he's tremendously skilled offensively. I think he could be 20 and 10. And yeah, if you've got pick 5, 6, 7, you've got a guy you think is going to be 20 and 10 in the league, then yeah, that's a great pick. Even if he's I don't even know if Randall's going to be a terrible defender. I just don't know if he's going to be a rim protector. But if you've got a guy who can go 20 and 10, even if he is a terrible defender, that's still probably a good pick at 5, 6, 7 in the draft. He's very skilled, and he was pretty perimeter oriented when he was in high school. Not something John Calipari really let him do, mainly out of scheme, not necessarily out of his personal skill. So I think we're going to start to see him, like Nate said, face up more and become a little bit more perimeter oriented when he gets to the pros. I'm a fan of Randall. But let's move on to kind of the second round. They're not really talked about guys. Is there a second round guy? Nate, I know you mentioned Micic earlier. Jonathan, is there a second round guy who you're looking at and thinking this guy is really worth a risk for? This is a Clippers centric podcast. Let's mention the Clippers for the first time. The Clippers, have Dick Parsons running them maybe for the first time. Really, that we're ever going to think about. They'll be thinking about maybe trying to buy a second round pick. If that's the case and the Clippers want to buy a second round pick, is there a guy in particular that you think that's a really good guy for them to go after? He could be really good value in round 2.
I mean, there's always guys who fall in any draft, really. It's all about how you look at your board, and then there's always two guys who slip more than you think they will. But a guy for the Clippers I like a lot would be Kem Birch out of UNLV. I mean, I think he's kind of rising a lot in the last few days, but he's a great athlete. He's got good size, and he can play the perimeter a little bit. I think he averaged like 4 blocks a game. I saw him in Vegas a few times this year, and he just jumps out the gym. He's a pretty skilled guy for a forward as well.
Nate, how about you? Anybody in the second round?
Well, as I said, I've been focusing more on the top guys, so I don't have a comprehensive view. But I'm gonna, of course, make you guys laugh at me by going with another foreign guy, someone who I saw in person way back at the 2012 Adidas Eurocamp, and that's Artem Klemenko. He's 7'1", has a very good body, good wingspan, extremely mobile. He's cut. I think he's someone who can put on some more weight if need be. Has not particularly explosive, but has a nice touch both around the rim and out to 17, 18 feet. And he's someone who's been playing in the second division in Russia, which is really, kind of a wasteland. And he's someone that you really would want to bring over. He might need some D-League seasoning. I don't know how good he is necessarily for the Clippers as far as helping next year. He's young. He's 19. But he is someone that they could develop. He gets into an NBA strength program, and he's someone who could make a very nice backup center in time.
We've talked about this, Fred. I'm a big fan of Patrick Young for the Clippers. I realize he's getting some looks in the first round, and it wouldn't shock me if they went with him at 28. But he could also slip to the early second round, the first 10 picks of the second round. I think he's a really smart defender. He's not a great shot blocker, but he'll intimidate shots at the rim. He's not a great rebounder either, and for a guy with his physical ability, you really expect him to be. But just in terms of a no-nonsense guy that is really going to give you great hustle, can finish around the rim, can catch lobs, even has really showed a nice touch around the rim this year at Florida, even if he never lived up to the potential that we all thought he had his first 1 or 2 years in Gainesville. I'm still a big fan of Patrick Young as a team's fourth big, really, and I think that's something that could really help the Clippers.
Yeah, Patrick Young always kind of reminds me of Reggie Evans. I know he's got more touch around the rim, but I think people forget Reggie Evans averaged 15 points a game when he was at Iowa his last year there. He's not quite the rebounder that Reggie Evans is, but in terms of the screens he sets, his body type, his style of play, the way he's a similar type of post defender, and that he will just continue to jab you, and you will be bruised up by the end of the night when you play. He kind of reminds me of a Reggie Evans with more skill around the rim and more athleticism type. Let's actually get into the Clippers. I'm just going to read off some names. And Jack, you mentioned Patrick Young as a potential pick. I'm going to read off some names. I'm curious to know if any of these guys intrigue you as potential Clippers picks at number 28. So I got Young, as Jack said, Jordan Adams, Shabazz Napier, Kyle Anderson, Jarnell Stokes, Jeremy Grant, Jordan Clarkson, KJ McDaniels, Mitch McGarry, Walter Tavares, and Anthony Early. If you're there, Jonathan, at number 28, the Clippers have needs. They could use a wing defender. They obviously can play big man. Who are you looking to try to take out of those crop of guys who are supposed to potentially be around at the end of the first round?
I mean, I think at that point in the draft, you don't worry about need. You just draft the player you think is the best player, because the odds are he's not going to play in the NBA anyways. But to me, I'm all about Kyle Anderson. I think he's a really underrated player. I talked about him earlier. He's 6'9". He runs out of Boris Diaw. He can pass, dribble, and shoot. To me, if he falls in the late first round, he just steals this draft.
I absolutely love Kyle Anderson. I'm actually hoping he gets drafted by the Heat a couple picks before the Clippers. I just think that's a great fit. But just for the Clippers, like you said, Fred, I'm a big fan of Shabazz Napier for them. Mitch McGarry is a good option, and even Anthony Early. We still don't know what the Clippers have in Reggie Bullock. Obviously, they need some help on the wings. And while Early is more of a 3-4 than a straight wing, he's a good shooter, a very, very underrated athlete. I think he tested a 40-inch vertical at the Combine. He'd be a good option for the Clippers.
I don't know what to think of Kyle Anderson, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around him, and maybe I never really will. Certainly because the analytics models love him so much. From a statistical standpoint, he's very effective. He has some great skills, especially his passing. But the one thing that does need to be said about him is the Boris Diaw comparisons with him need to stop. Boris Diaw, right now at age 32, carrying 40 extra pounds, is way more athletic than Kyle Anderson is as a 20-year-old. And young Boris Diaw was an amazing athlete, a guy who was catching reverse dunk alley-oops. Kyle Anderson, I think, had 4 dunks all year or something like that. So, and the reason that that's important is now how good of a offensive player is Kyle Anderson really, especially if you're talking about him now later on in the draft. Are you going to be running your offense through him all the time? Yeah, maybe a little bit. He's a real good passer, but the Spurs aren't running their offense through Boris Diaw all the time, but he provides other things. He can defend even, LeBron James, credibly. Kyle Anderson will not be defending LeBron James, ever. And he's someone who gets on the glass pretty well and, even provides a little bit of a resistance at the rim. And if Kyle Anderson isn't someone who's going to have the ball in his hands all the time, then his defensive deficiencies really become a problem. And can he stay on the floor if he's not important enough to be a primary offensive option? I don't know the answer to that, but certainly he's someone who does not project as a plus defender in any way or a plus athlete in any way, in contrast to Diaw.
I think we all want to love Kyle Anderson because we love guys that have knack and feel and just innate court sense and things like that. And we obviously love big ball handlers. I was thinking of a comparison for him last night, and the one that I came up with, even though they played different positions, is Kendall Marshall out of North Carolina, the Lakers point guard. He had a much better year this year under Mike D'Antoni, but the worry with him is that he's just, with Anderson and Marshall, even though they play different positions, that they're just both such subpar athletes. And like Nate said, you're not going to put the ball in their hands for a majority of a game. So that's certainly something to consider with Anderson. And like Nate said, I really can't wrap my mind around him, even though I really want to love him as a prospect.
Yeah, I think the reason that we see the Boris Diaw comparison with Anderson is probably more because of narrative than anything else, right? Like Boris Diaw was point guard when he came into the league, and people thought he was just going to be a big lumbering point guard, which is pretty much what Anderson is right now. And then the people who think that Diaw is going to, who think that Anderson might find success, are saying like, oh well, if you move from point guard to maybe like a undersized power forward or a small forward, then all of a sudden that could be different. Like I think on Drafted or maybe on Bleacher Report, I think his player profile has him as a point guard / small forward, which is so weird to see. That's not like a thing that you see for players. So it kind of shows just that little bit right there. It shows the intrigue of Anderson. I'm more on Nate's side with Anderson, and I'm not as big a supporter pretty much for all the reasons that Nate said. A guy that I like for the Clippers, I'm very intrigued by KJ McDaniels. I think he's a tremendous shot blocker for someone with who plays small forward position. And he's got this unbelievable athleticism. I think he's got high defensive potential. I think that's something the Clippers could really use right now. Jack, do you have any thoughts on maybe the Clippers going with a more defensive wing if McDaniels would be a good fit?
I really like McDaniels. To be honest with you, I just assumed he'd be gone before the Clippers picked at 28. I think reports have him going in the late teens, early 20s, or am I off there, Fred?
I see him all over the place. I see him, like there's some places I see him 30, some places I see him 23. Like he's kind of all over. But I think if the Clippers could get there, I mean, look, my dream scenario is Adrian Payne falls to like 22 or 23, and then the Clippers send a package including the 28th pick to the Jazz, and they draft Payne at 23, and then I throw a huge party at my house to welcome Adrian Payne to the Clippers.
I tried to swing that in the Hardwood Paroxysm mock draft. Couldn't get it done. So if that's a harbinger of things to come, it's not looking good for you, Fred.
I want Adrian Payne the Clippers so badly. Like I'll be so happy. All right, so final thoughts. Jonathan, who's the one guy who's going to be the best player from this draft?
I mean, I'll stay with Joel Embiid. I think, I don't know, obviously I'm not a doctor, but to me, he's the best player in this draft by a mile. So, I don't know. If he's healthy, I think he's the best player by far.
Zach?
I tend to agree with Jonathan. If Embiid's healthy, I think he's the guy, but there are big questions with big guys with a back problem and then the specific stress fracture that he had in his foot. Big guys, it's been tough for them to come back from that in the past. So right now, I think the safe bet is Wiggins.
Yeah, I'm going to say Wiggins as well. I think it's, it could totally be Embiid. If Embiid is healthy, then Wiggins has the asterisk. If Embiid is healthy, I think it's Embiid. He's so skilled and he's so athletic and he's got the basketball IQ. He knows how to play defense and he's got the body. I mean, if he's able to stay healthy, I think he's going to be tremendous. But if he's not, which seems like that's a distinct possibility now, I'm going to say Andrew Wiggins. That's going to do it for us completely. Nate, I think his computer died about 5 seconds ago and is now he's departed early. Quickly before we go, draft's Thursday evening, 7:30 start time on ESPN. We have plenty more draft content coming up on ClipperBlog this week. We've got 5 more questions from Andrew for me. We've got another mailbag tomorrow. We'll probably be doing. We did one last year. We did a ClipperBlog live from the draft, so I assume we'll be doing another one this year, and we'll have some more stuff up on the site. So stick around and keep out for that. For Nate Duncan, who is no longer here, Jack Winter, and oh wow, Nate's back. Nate, I was just signing off. Nate, you want to give us? I was just about to finish up, but do you want to give us your guy who's going to be the player from the draft?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Which guy in the draft this year is going to be the best player?
I think Exum has the highest ceiling and the best chance of being an absolute superstar, top 5 best player in the NBA, but I said Jabari should be drafted number 1. I think he has a little bit better chance of success, so I would have to say him.
All right. There you go. Nate, you just barely got in time. I was about to say that we were. Well, Nate, Jonathan, Jack, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. It was a great show. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.
Have a good one, folks.
Thanks, guys.